Here we go. Let's get started. Welcome to Examining Our Christian Heritage 1. And as always, we'll begin each session with a short devotional and then a word of prayer. And this is from the book of Joshua. This is Joshua chapter 4. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. And when it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." Excuse me. One of the things about church history, one of the things about history in general is we sometimes overlook it, right? We make history out to be this drudgery, but the truth is, history is part. I mean, this is our story. This is where we come from. This is who we are. We're going to talk about things that shape us as Christian ministers, even in the 21st century. Tonight, we're going to begin in the apostolic era, immediately after Jesus ascended into heaven. And all of that story from that time to here has shaped us. And you're going to be amazed, I think, over the next several weeks about all the ways that we've been shaped by our history. And so, and that's even shown in this story. This story, the Israelites are crossing over the Jordan. And they build a memorial as a reminder that this is their story. This is who they are. This is where they come from. And you're going to find that that's the reality in church history. There's going to be a temptation for you, and it's a real temptation to just blow this off as no big deal. I think that would be a mistake, because this is our story. This is not the story of a bunch of dead people. This is our story. We are a part of this big Christian story. We're shaped by it. We're going to be equipped by it. And I am very confident that God's going to do something truly amazing in this course. Mm-hmm. So with that, let's stop and pray for just a second. Lord, I thank you so much for your love and your goodness. I thank you, God, for your power and your presence. And I pray, Father, for these students as they are being prepared for ministry. And Lord, I'm excited about what you're going to do in them and through them. I pray for their families. I pray, Lord, that you would bless them and keep them. I pray, Lord, that as they study, they would find this to be a time of renewal and refreshment. And Lord, I pray that in everything, your purposes would be done. Lord, I pray for our students who are not with us tonight. We do have a few. Nick Hale and his family is moving. And Lord, I pray for Nate Boone and the challenges that he's facing with his sister. Lord, I pray that you would show them mercy and be good to them. In the name of Jesus, amen. Just a moment. Okay. So again, this is Examining Our Christian Heritage 1, and just. Can you all see the slides? You got them? Okay. Anybody not see them?
I see. Yeah, I do see one slide.
Oh, yeah, you only see one. I've got a bunch more, but you only see. Need to see one. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, I want to welcome you. And so let's just take a minute and just kind of get to know each other. So this is the standard welcome to the class stuff. And so let's just take a few minutes and just have everybody tell us a little bit about yourselves. Let's tell us about your family. Tell us about where you're ministering and what you're doing. Tell us where you are in your ministry preparation. and then one thing you'd like to get out of the class.
Hmm.
And whoever wants to go first can go first.
My name is Tim Bertrand. I go to Eastridge Church of the Nazarene in Wichita. The Lord has called me into missions.
Okay.
Currently, I am the deputation coordinator for the NMI here on the district. And
Yep.
so I get the opportunity to work with a lot of missionaries in that aspect, which I love.
Right.
And I have taken 8 courses of studies so far. I still have a lot to go.
Okay.
And I am married. I have 2 kids. Both my kids are grown. I have a 24-year-old daughter and a granddaughter who's now 18 months old. She's the love of my life. And I have a 27-year-old son.
Okay. Hey,
And-
Colin and Barb, are you guys okay? You have your microphone muted.
And I want to get out of this class.
Yeah.
History is really, I love history. And I've only been a Christian for almost 4 years now. And one of the things that as a non-Christian, a lot of people said was that Jesus doesn't exist, and a lot of confusions behind the beginning of the church. And so I've done a lot of studying on this, and I think this will be doing something more formal will be great. Just being able to help me, in my mind, kind of see a different aspect of it than today.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, who's next?
Okay, are we on? Just call them.
Hi, Colin. We hear you, but we don't see you anymore.
Well,
Ava, you want to go next?
Yes. Okay, my name is Eva Cruz.
Got you,
I
Colin.
am-
Barb.
Yes.
See, I want to see this.
I am a co-pastor at Eastridge,
Okay.
Wichita Church,
Mhm.
and I have received my call for maybe about more than 12 years ago.
Okay.
And I've been getting classes on and off, being hard for me to get them. But I'm so thankful that finally through this system, I will be able to finish up because I only have 5 left, 5 courses left. So
Awesome.
thank God. So I'm gonna work hard to see if I can finish up before the next ordination.
Okay.
I have a call to preach the gospel, but also I feel the call to be a missionary one day.
Okay. Awesome.
Yes, and I have my family, my husband and I've been married for over 24 years.
Okay.
And my 2 kids, my oldest one is 21 and he's in his last year of college.
Okay. Wow.
And my daughter is 15 years. And both of them, we all are serving down there at Wichita.
Excellent. Glad to hear. One thing you'd like to get out of the class?
Yes, as Emma's team, I really love to read and learn about history. So I'm so excited about learning more about, like you just say, is our history.
Okay.
So I'm so
Great.
glad that we'll learn more about it.
Okay.
Mhm.
Anyone from the Junction City crew?
Yeah, I'll go first. Sarah Becker.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Hi.
We have 8 children. The oldest is almost 22. The youngest is 6 months.
May the Lord bless you and keep you.
Oh, you're so young.
I work here at the church. I'm the children's pastor with a district license.
Excellent.
Lots more classes to go. And I guess as far as getting something out of the class, I'm just open and excited to see what God's going to show me and what I can glean and just go from whatever that is. But that's about it.
I met your new pastor this past weekend at the Ministers and Mates Retreat, and sounds like there's some really cool things ahead for Junction City.
Yeah, I think we're all very excited and happy to have him finally. So that's super good.
Excellent. Okay, next from Junction City.
So I'm Linda Blades.
Hi, Linda.
How are you? And
Good.
we have one daughter. She's 14 and starting 9th grade, which I wasn't ready for. So I'm on staff here as Connections Pastor.
Okay.
License. I have 5 classes to take, so this plus 4 more.
Mm-hmm.
Still in the early process of just got district license this year. So
Okay.
Love it here. I feel like the Lord has called me into ministry at a young age, but I don't think I quite understood what that was until I got older and the Lord started to birth different things within me.
Okay.
When I was in high school, I didn't like history, so. But I think as I get older, I realize how important history is, and especially church history.
Sure.
You know, I get asked a lot of times, well, how did this happen? Or when did the Nazarene church start? Or what, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it would be good to be able to see from Acts right through to today. So
okay, and that's exactly what we're doing. Acts, the apostolic era to the present. Yep.
Well, I'm excited about it. So we'll see.
Awesome. Anyone else from Junction City?
Hi, I'm Dakota.
Hi, Dakota.
And I am the second oldest of Sarah's 8 children.
Okay.
I just received my local license.
Okay.
Praise the Lord.
I've been called into youth ministry
Amen.
a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And I love this church. This is an amazing, wonderful church. I love it here. And I'm really excited for this class. I did Bible quizzing over the book of Acts and Romans, and I'm really excited for this one.
All right. Sounds good. Okay. Anyone else from Junction City? Is it just the 3 of you?
It is. It's just the 3 of us.
Okay.
I have a quick question, though. As far as what our screen shows, it's kind of split. We see that there's a slide, but we can only make out about 1/4 of it, probably.
Okay. I'm not sure why that's the case.
We've got like
see the whole slide.
Well, we see, there's kind of 2 different things. We're seeing like a welcome slide and a syllabus review, but it's quite small. And then we see that there's a big slide that might take up the whole screen, but it's only showing about 1/4 of it.
Okay. Do you guys? Does everyone see 1 slide or 2?
I see the same thing she does. That's actually
All right. Let me.
small, but the welcome one is actually made big. That 1/4 that we're seeing is that same welcome. It's the same slides.
How's that?
Better.
That's a little better.
Yes.
All right. There we go. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Colin and Barb, tell us about yourselves.
Well, we're also from the Church of Nazarene in Junction City, and we've been Christians for quite a while. Both of us are retired and got the call from the Lord to go into ministry. Currently, we both hold local licenses, and we have been planting a church or attempting to plant a church in Dwight, Kansas, which is a population of about 200 people. And we've really making some headways there with the community. And we have had some great services. We've got to preach to about 40 or 50 people at a time. And we're
huge.
Just looking for great things to happen there.
That's huge.
Amen.
Excellent. So tell us what you'd like to get out of the course.
I like history, and I like the little things that you don't find in history. I'm really concerned about finding out a little bit more about the apostolic to the time of the Roman Catholic Church starting.
Well, good news for you. We're going to spend about 4 weeks talking about that.
Okay, good.
All right. Here, I'm in here with Todd and Philip, and I'm going to turn the camera so they can. That's Todd.
Hey, Todd.
I guess that means I get to go next.
You're next.
I felt a call to ministry probably 4 to 5 years ago. Some different things happened in my life to where it didn't come to fruition until now. I am currently serving on the praise team here at the Dodge City Church of the Nazarene, and what I hope you get out of this course is I've always liked history, and a lot of people like to go on the internet and look at their family tree and find out what makes their family tick and what their family's made up of. And this kind of feels like that for me with this course, because it just, this is where I come from. Like Pastor said, this is my family, and I want to find out as much as I can about every little bit of it. So that's what I hope to take out of this class.
Excellent. And then turn this around and towards Philip. There you go.
I am Philip Brown, and I'm the youth pastor here at Dodge City Church of the Nazarene. I have 4 kids, all boys, ages 0 to 12. I am maybe about a third, I don't know, a third of the way into the ministry prep program. I kind of got a late start. What I hope to get out of this class is an understanding of the merits that form Christianity. I don't know, often today it's easy to overlook those foundations, and that's really what everything is built upon. And so for me, knowing that foundation is important.
It is. Excellent. And my name is Justin Hayes, and I have been married for 22 years, and I have 4 children also, ranging from 13 to 3. I've been in ministry for 21 years, actually. And I've been a youth pastor, an associate pastor, a lead pastor. I've served in different areas. I am an ordained elder. I have 4 degrees. I have a bachelor's degree in Christian leadership. I have a Master of Divinity degree from Asbury Theological Seminary, and I have a Doctor of Education degree from Olivet Nazarene University. And the one thing that I want to get out of this class is I'm looking forward to the questions that you guys are going to ask, right? That one of the things I love about teaching history is there's going to be things that we talk about that are going to blow you away. And you're going to ask, are these really Christians? Did Christians really do this? And the short answer is, yeah, we're going to cover it. And, but I always look forward to those moments. I look forward to those times. Yeah, you're going to find out that Christianity has changed a lot in 2,000 years. And it's always fun to kind of learn that part. The class is an open forum, just a little class rules. It is an open forum, so you are allowed to make comments. You're allowed to ask questions, no problem. You're even allowed to debate from time to time, as long as the debates remain civil, right? We're all here to build one another up and strengthen one another, to equip one another for ministry. But debates are permitted as long as they stay civil and loving. And then it's okay to also listen to differing views. All of us are going to interpret some of these events a little differently, and that's perfectly okay. Perfectly okay. And I would encourage you to just listen to what other people have to say. The structure is we're going to be looking at 8 sessions of 3 hours. Now, I sent you all the syllabus today, right? And the syllabus has stuff only scheduled for 7, and the 8th is like leftover. Just some heads up, plan on the 8th. Okay. This is an information dump. We're going to have a lot of conversation, and it's going to carry over. So when you read the syllabus and it says we only have lessons scheduled through 7 sessions, just count on that going into 8. All right. 8 sessions, 2 locations. We're going to do this every week on Thursday nights on Zoom or here at DC Naz. Class attendance is very important. Okay, very important. You only have 8 sessions. So if you can miss up to 2, but remember that's a fourth of the class, right? That's a fourth of the class. And if you miss any, you will be expected to do some makeup work. All right. It's important. The class is also strongest when there's plenty of participation. Now it is a lecture-based course. I will tell you that there's going to be I'm going to be doing a lot of the talking, but we do have discussion times, formal discussion times and informal. Strongly encourage you to participate. You do have homework, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But you're going to have homework every week. Every week. It is a college level course, so I do expect to see college level work. Now, I'm not going to kill you if you've not been in school for a while. I'm not going to kill you on grammar and stuff like that. But what I do want to see is I want to see like some thought. I want when you submit a paper, especially your multi-page papers, that you're giving some real thought to what we're talking about, right? That you're interpreting an event or a person with some insight, some critical thinking. And then any writing format is okay, but please, if you happen to quote somebody directly, cite that person. Somehow let me know that you are using intellectual integrity and citing. Okay? And if you need any help with those things, let me know. I will be glad to help you with whatever's necessary.
I couldn't understand.
Which one? Ava? Which one, honey?
Could you please repeat that part?
We kind of lost connection there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what's the last thing you heard then?
A little after college level.
Okay, so you heard college. All right. This is internet based, so if the connection ever messes up, just tell me. Another thing that you can do if you looks like you've lost it for a while, my phone number is in the syllabus. I've given it to you. Text me and I'll and we'll get you all caught up. Okay. What I was saying on writing format is that has to do with citing work. So if you quote someone directly in one of your papers, make sure you let me know that that's a quote. Okay. Part of this is also equipping you to do academic work, and plagiarism is like the worst thing you can do in the academy. And so just if you cite somebody, just let me know. And if you need help with that, if you need help citing somebody, let me know. I'll be glad to help you. I will answer your questions throughout the week. So don't be afraid to text, email, or call at any time, and I'll help you with whatever's going on. Okay? You guys all good?
Yes.
You have 2 basic texts, the Bible, although I will tell you we're not going to use the Bible a lot, but it's a standard text, and any standard translation of the English Bible. So if you happen to cite the Bible, you can use a translation. So the NIV, King James, NASB, NRSV, New Living. You are not allowed to use a paraphrase. So things like the Message, the New Living Bible, the Amplified Bible. I don't want to see any of those in your papers. Okay, those are not standard translations. Those are paraphrases. But where you're going to spend a lot of your time is Church History in Plain Language, the 4th edition. And if you haven't ordered it, you might want to as soon as possible. Assignments. Each week, you're going to read as much as you can. Okay, I'm not going to give you, basically, by the last session, you need to have the book finished. That's going to be the expectation. So read as much as you can, and each week, due on Thursdays, is a 1-page single-spaced response paper. And in that paper, there's some things I want to see. I want to see that I want you to report how much you've read. And you can even make that your first sentence. I read pages 7 to 105 or whatever. Okay. So report how much you've read. Give a brief summary of your reading. I'm not gonna be real particular on that. I just want to see that you're interacting with the material, and then pull out some ideas. Remember, you only got one page. And then pull out some ideas from your reading that could impact your present ministry or your present understanding of ministry. Any questions on the response paper?
Are we going to return it by email?
Yeah. What's that?
Are we going to submit this homework by email?
Yep. You can email it and at justin@dcnaz.org. Okay. And I'll get that for you later. I'll send that to you again.
Okay.
Then throughout the course, you're going to write three 3-page identification papers. And basically, you're going to pull from the first 500, the second 500, or the third 500 years, a person or event that are significant from that era. I want you to give me a little summary of who that person is or what that event was about. Talk about its impact on Christianity and then its impact on your personal ministry. I am going to put together a grading rubric for these papers and send you out just so that you know how they're going to be broken down points-wise. That'll be helpful as you write them. I'm sorry I didn't get that done before tonight, so forgive me.
So each paper is going to be one from the first 500 years, one from the second, and one from the third.
Yep. The last one is due 2 weeks after the final session. Okay. So when we're done here, you still have 2 weeks of work left in the form of a paper and your journal. This is the last one. A journal is what I want to see is each week I want to see 2 entries in a journal, 2 journal entries about church history. So how you're interacting with it. I am not going to grade it on like content. I'm not going to read it and tear it apart and grade it. I'm going to look to see that you did it. And if you did it, you get 50 points. If you didn't do it, you get 0. That's kind of the deal with the journal. I don't grade people on their thoughts. I just want to see that you've done it. Your entries can be as long as you want them to be. I would suggest, just for your own benefit, I would suggest that your journal entries are meaningful, right? That you've given it some real thought. 2 entries per week, so that's a minimum of 16. All right, 16 entries. Any questions?
Email those as well?
That is at the end. It's due on the same day as your last paper, so 2 weeks after the last session. So I think that is the first Thursday of December, I think. Yeah, keep them digital, or if you write in a journal and you want to scan them and email them to me too. However you want to do it. The journal is all up to you. Just do it. That's kind of the deal with the journal. All right? Any questions on any of it?
Yeah, we can't find the syllabus that was sent to us.
Okay, well, I'll make sure I get sent to you again then, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. All right. This is pass-fail, but if you want to know like how well you do, here is a grade scale. Here's one thing that I will tell you how I grade. If you do the paper, if you do the homework, the worst you can get on any assignment is a 65%. Okay? And the only way that you get worse than that is if you don't do it at all. But if you turn in a paper, the worst you're going to get is a 65%. That's the absolute worst. So it actually benefits you as points compile that even if you have like one bad paper, you still have a chance at passing. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So this is kind of how it works down. You got excellent, good, satisfactory, unsatisfactory. You need 504 points to pass this class. Anything below 504, anything below 504 points is a failing course. And I want to tell you something. I have taught a lot of classes, both in about 3 different institutions, and I have never failed anybody who did their homework. Okay, so you do your work, you're going to pass this class. It's really, I'm pretty easy when it comes to that. Every time I've ever failed anybody, it's because they didn't do their work. So do your coursework and you'll pass, and you don't have to worry about it. All right. Any questions on any of that? Ready to start talking history? All right.
Let's go.
Let's do it. Okay, we're going to begin at the beginning, the apostolic era, and let's start with a little discussion. What do you think of when you hear the word apostle?
Those people that were alive that actually seen Jesus in the flesh.
Okay. Everyone who saw Jesus alive?
Those that followed him. The 12 people closest to him, I guess, in mindset.
Okay, the 12. Okay. All right. What else? What else do you think? What else? What other ideas do you think about when you hear the word apostle?
Those who are committed to spreading the gospel.
Well, the leader of
Pioneers of our faith.
Say that again, Ava.
Pioneers. There were pioneers of our faith.
Pioneers of our faith. What did you say, Philip?
Those who were committed to spreading the gospel.
Those who were committed to spreading the gospel. Okay.
they were the leaders of the church.
Leaders of the church. All right. Okay. Anything else?
Once the apostles died off, there is no more apostles.
Once the apostles died off, there were no more apostles. Okay, there's lots of people in history that would disagree with you, but that is a definite perspective. Yeah. What else? Well, then let's talk about this. What is an apostle? So those are things that pop out those are first impressions. But what is an apostle?
Someone committed to serving Christ.
Someone committed to serving Christ. Okay. Okay. What else? How about this? What makes a person an apostle? What separates an apostle from other people?
An apostle follow Jesus and follow his commandments.
Follow Jesus, followed his commandments. Okay. Mm-hmm. Is everyone that follows Jesus or his commandments an apostle then? No. Probably not. Yeah, but definitely starting point. He's going to pull out of his believers. Sure. Anything else?
I think chosen by God. That calling is a God-given, ordained thing.
Excellent. Just some foreshadowing. You're right. That is a Jesus Christ ordained situation. Yes. Excellent. Any other thoughts before we jump in?
I say the apostles were like the trailblazers. They're the ones who, in a sense, got the direct maybe revelation or from God, and imparted that to the people to do the work and to spread the gospel.
Yeah. Yes, very much a part of that. Yeah, that the ones who are the sending those who kind of go before everybody else. Is that what you're talking about there?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
well, let's talk about. I'm sorry.
I was going to say Paul claimed to be apostle because he had a confrontation with Jesus and felt that Jesus sent him forth in the ministry.
Yep. Paul. That is certainly part of Paul's story. In fact, Paul spends a great deal of time in his epistles defending his apostleship because some believed that he was illegitimate. Actually, not some.
Many.
Most. Paul was highly controversial in his own lifetime. We kind of revere Paul, but he had more enemies than he had friends. Yeah. Let's talk about the apostles, right? Comes from the Greek word apostolos. Just some heads up. I will use original languages, but they're more reminders to me than expectations for you. Okay. It just keeps my skills sharp. Does that make sense? So I always want to say that just so that people don't freak out when they see like original language. An apostle comes from the Greek word apostolos, meaning emissary or herald. And they were the earliest communicators of Christian truth. Even Jesus, or not Jesus, the apostles themselves claimed that their word with the prophets and Christ as the chief cornerstone were the foundations of Christian teaching. They were the earliest communicators of Christian truth. They argued that the prophets were the ones through whom God revealed himself before the coming of Jesus. But after the coming of Jesus, they are the ones who carry forth Christ's story. The apostles carried this principle we're participating in this situation called apostolic authority. And remember, before, when the apostles were running around, the New Testament didn't exist. And so they were the ones who were speaking on behalf of Christ Jesus. And so they carried this level of authority that that was important throughout the whole of the church. And this authority was rooted in their personal appointment for Christ. The main apostles, and we're going to talk about all of them, like how they're all listed here in a few minutes. But the 12 and Paul, they saw themselves as personally appointed by Christ Jesus to proclaim his message. And that gave them a certain level of authority that still carries on to this day. Their authority was, their words were considered canonical, meaning that these were teachings that they could base their lives on. The apostles were embraced in the first century. Now, I did mention a moment ago, Paul was highly controversial. But by the time Paul had died, the opinion on Paul had changed immensely. And there were a ton of reasons. For one, Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. And when that happened, Christianity made a huge shift from a Jewish faith to a Gentile faith. And when that happened, Paul's credibility shot through the roof. And that's one of the reasons that many people argue that Christianity is more Pauline than it is even based on Jesus. I disagree with that because I understand what Paul's perspectives were, and I understand what the other apostles were communicating. But by the time 70 AD, and by that time Paul had been dead for about 5-6 years, his credibility shot through the roof with the fall of Jerusalem. Now, believe it or not, apostolic authority is still an issue in the church today. We still wrestle with the issue of apostolic authority. And some places that we still deal with this is the papacy. The Pope claims to be the successor of St. Peter, and the Pope argues that he carries full apostolic authority, that his words are as authoritative as anybody in the first century. Now, that is very much up for debate, and just some heads up, I'll just tell you right now, I am not anti-Catholic. The Catholic Church does some really good things, but one thing that I do disagree with in particular is the issue of apostolic authority for the papacy. Another issue that pops up regarding apostolic authority is biblical canon. Is the New Testament worth listening to when all these other voices in the world are telling us that we shouldn't? And it really comes back to, does it have authority through the apostolic expression? And then the final issue is a principle called apostolic succession. And apostolic succession is the argument that ordained ministers can trace their ordination from the laying on of hands from the present all the way back to Jesus and the apostles. Now, the Church of the Nazarene, I will tell you this, the Church of the Nazarene does not have a formal statement on it, but we do actually believe in a modified version of apostolic succession. A colleague of mine, I won't say he's a friend, but a colleague of mine wrote a very interesting blog post recently, where he got on some databases and was able to trace his ordination all the way back to the apostles. Now, what he had to do was he traced it through the Church of the Nazarene all the way back, and then through the Methodist Church all the way back to John Wesley, and then John Wesley through the Anglican Church, and then through the Roman Catholic Church. So it wasn't just like the Church of the Nazarene kept this long list, but it was very interesting to see how his ordination, and mine for that matter, because he and I were ordained by the same general superintendent, how we could trace our ordination all the way back to this. And it created a connection. When I read that, it created in my mind like a connection to the larger church. And so when I read on my ordination certificate that I am ordained an elder in the Church of God according to the rules of the Church of the Nazarene, it makes sense. Our view of ordination is that when you all are ordained, we do not argue that you are ordained in the Church of the Nazarene. We believe that you are ordained in the Church of Jesus Christ according to our rules. That is a big difference. That's a high view of ministry. So that issue of apostolic succession is still very present. Any questions so far? Great. Well, let's talk about who were the apostles. Well, we do have the 12, and who were in that 12 is a little dubious because we have 3 lists. Matthew and Mark have their list. Luke and Acts have their list, or have Luke's list, the same author, and John, and they don't all jive. And throughout the centuries, there have been countless ways that they have been reconciled. The point that I think is, I don't know that it matters, because all of them were identified by Jesus in the gospel as apostles, and so they all carry that. So even though there's like 16 of them, 16 of the 12, they all carry that apostolic authority. So there's the 12. Obviously, we've already talked about Paul. Paul after Jesus is the most influential person in Christian history. Okay, we've all been shaped by Paul. Every believer in the world has been shaped by Paul. And then we have the 12 and Paul are interesting because they all have their commissions as apostles from Jesus. But then we have these few people who are identified in the text. I call them the lesser apostles, not because they're not important, just because they're not one of the 12 and they're not Paul. We have Barnabas. We have James, the brother of Jesus. Does anybody know who he is?
He became the chief priest of the church in Jerusalem.
He was one of the leaders of the church in Jerusalem. Yeah, he also wrote the book of James. Okay, yeah, the book of James is written by a brother of Jesus, and that has been that's what tradition tells us. Josephus, actually, that Jewish historian from the 1st century, he argues that James was Jesus' brother. And then, interestingly enough, so was Jude, the writer of the book of Jude, was also a brother of Jesus.
Oh, really? Yep.
Both of them. Yep. Barnabas, of course, traveled with Paul, but all 3 of these guys are identified in the New Testament as apostles. So you can see that the list is more than the 12. It's not like we have hundreds of apostles running around, but it's more than the 12. Yeah. Mark and Luke. Okay, that's a great question. Did you all hear that question?
No.
Philip asked if Mark and Luke are considered apostles. The answer is,
No.
What did you say? No.
Yeah, I said no.
Okay. It depends on who you ask, actually. Some argue that they are. Tradition has identified them as evangelists, meaning the writers of the Gospels. That's a category that only applies to 4 people. They do not carry apostolic authority the way that Paul did or the way Peter did. Now, when their Gospels were being considered, for inclusion in the New Testament canon, what they did was every book in the New Testament is attached to an apostle. It's a principle called apostolicity, and we'll talk about that later when we get to the New Testament canon. But with Mark and Luke, what they did was, okay, who mentored these guys? Paul mentored Luke, and Peter mentored Mark. Actually, initially, Paul was mentoring Mark, but Paul fires Mark and sends him away. And tradition has taught that then he went to work with Peter, and Peter mentored him. So that's kind of the story with them. Are they apostles? I argue that they're writers of the Gospels more than they carried apostolic authority, primarily because they never saw Jesus. But like I said, that doesn't always apply with Barnabas either. At least we don't think Barnabas did. And there's certainly many who believe that Luke was one of the 70. You know, when Jesus sends out one of the 70, there's some that argue that he was one of them. Excuse me.
It's interesting to note that Luke was a physician and Paul was a very highly trained Pharisee. And I think that's what's one of the reasons Paul's Gospels and his letters are so prominent, because they were educated and able to convey all that to the church.
Maybe. One thing that we do see that New Testament scholars see about the Bibles or about the writings in the New Testament. Paul is fairly sophisticated with Greek. Now, he's a Hellenistic Jew. He was born in Tarsus, and he is a Hellenistic, meaning that he is a Greek Jew versus a Hebraic Jew, meaning it talking about their ethnic foundations and where they were raised. But Mark, believe it or not, Greek scholars really point out how poorly written the book of Mark is in Greek, interestingly enough. So it may be, you may be onto something there. You may be on something there. The apostles all lived during the first century. And and the thing is that we actually know more about them from tradition than we do from historiography. Historiography is a big fancy word for the writing of history. We know more about them from tradition than we do from the writings of history. The truth is we don't know much about what happened to them. Here's what we do know. The Bible tells us the fates of 2 apostles. That's it. James, the son of Zebedee, was executed by Herod Agrippa. That's in Acts chapter 12. And then we also know that John was exiled to the island of Patmos. And anybody know what happened when he was there? He wrote the book of Revelation while he was exiled to the island of Patmos. So we don't know much about what happened to them. Excuse me. But we do have some famous traditions. Paul, by tradition, okay, listen, and the traditions are not happy endings. I'll just foreshadow that, right? The traditions are not happy endings. Tradition teaches that of the 12, only John escaped martyrdom. Only John. But tradition teaches that Paul was beheaded by Nero in Rome about 64 AD, about 64-ish. Peter died around the same time also. The story with him is, the story was that he was crucified upside down. Does anybody know that story?
Yes.
Yep. Basically, they took him out to crucify him, and he says to his executioner, "I do not feel worthy to die the same way as my Lord." And so they crucified him upside down. It's a great story. It's a kind of a romantic story. I don't know if you can, I don't know if it's true or not. The way that you die in crucifixion is through asphyxiation. And what happens is the way that you're positioned, your body collapses on the diaphragm and you can't breathe. I don't know if that would work if you were crucified upside down, but I can tell you what, it would be awful. It would be awful. So here's an interesting one. Thomas. Tradition teaches that Thomas was speared in India.
Right.
But let me tell you what happened. So tradition teaches that he was speared, that he took God calls him to take the gospel to India. He goes there and he is speared, and it kind of makes sense. Hinduism is older than Christianity, and Hindus have been hostile to Christians, okay, historically, very hostile. Well, in the 1500s, let's fast forward 1500 years. In the 1500s, Jesuit missionaries go to India. And when they got there, they found a Christian community that had been there since the ancient times. And they're called the Mar Thomas Christians. Their New Testament is not the 27 books we have because they never had it. They have a few books that are ascribed that they consider canonical. But their story is that they were they are founded, and they are descendants from the Christians that Thomas had the church that Thomas had established when he was there before his martyrdom. And then here's another one. Andrew was crucified, according to the story, on a traverse cross. That means like this, right? Crucified on a traverse cross in Armenia. And so St. Andrew's cross, if you ever see it in artwork, is shaped like that versus like that. So any questions on any of this? Anybody fascinated or bored yet?
Nope.
I thought it was interesting that Thomas was spared when he was the one who doubted that Jesus had risen.
Yeah.
Even things.
Thomas takes a real kick in the face for that, but the truth is they all ran from him.
Yeah.
Right? Every one of them doubted. Mm-hmm. He just gets kicked in the face because he didn't happen to be there initially when they saw Jesus. But there's no reason to believe that when Mary Magdalene came into the upper room and said, "I saw Jesus alive," that some of the others didn't say, "You are out of your mind, Mary." I mean, there's no reason to believe otherwise. And so, like I said, Thomas kind of gets kicked in the face, but all of them had their problems about that time. So, yeah. So good observation. Good observation. Okay, let's talk about the world of the apostles. So we talk about the apostles. Now we're going to start moving away from them because there's a lot to be read. There's a lot of work that's been done on the apostles. You can read the book of Acts and kind of get the general story. But what you don't get is the background. What's going on in the world at the time? And the world of the apostles, which was the Mediterranean world, was dominated by Rome. And Rome carried with it what's called Hellenistic culture. Anybody know what Hellenistic means?
Greek culture?
What is it?
Greek culture?
It is Greek culture. Very good. The interesting thing about Greek is actually like a vulgar a vulgar English word. The official term for Greeks are Hellenes. In fact, the present country Greece, the official name of it is the Hellenic Republic. And so whenever you see this word Hellen, Hellen, so Hellenic or Hellenistic, it has to do with Greek. It has to do with Greek culture. And Greek culture dominated the Roman Empire. Partly because Romans, we'll talk about that in a minute. Romans kind of stole culture from just about everybody, especially the Greeks. Greek was the lingua franca, meaning that was the language of business. And they really valued philosophy. I mean, really valued philosophy. And there were two primary philosophical schools going on during the era of the apostles. The first is called Stoicism. And Stoicism was founded by a guy named Zeno in the 3rd century BC. And it really concerned itself with the relationship between virtue and duty. And basically, Stoicism valued duty over all things, including security, pleasure, and comfort. The highest virtue, according to Stoicism, was to do your duty, especially if you suffered while doing your duty. Duty was the path to a virtuous life. And so that was actually like, Stoicism was much more popular than the second one we'll talk about here in a minute. But actually Stoicism and that emphasis on duty was one of the ways that Roman armies were so effective. And one of the reasons that Roman armies were kind of fearless was because this Stoic philosophy had worked its way in, that the best thing that a Roman soldier could do was to do his duty. And so charge in, attack, run headlong into battle. That created even that created a very fierce army for the Romans. It created like really strong governmental ties. I mean, it was that Stoic issue was huge. The second one is kind of the opposite. The next one is called Epicureanism. And Epicureanism started about the same time as Stoicism in the 3rd century BC. And it was highly pessimistic. Highly pessimistic. It believed that basically life was empty and directionless. Yay! And so empty and directionless that, like, the only way that you were going to find joy in life was to indulge every pleasure. Every pleasure you could think of, you should indulge, because it was the only hope that you really had to kind of make it in the world, right? You didn't want to live for the future. You lived entirely for the day. And it actually, and Epicureans coined a phrase: eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. Both of these philosophies appear in the New Testament, okay? And Paul in particular writes against both of them at different times. But Epicureanism, I want to point out specifically, in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul is talking about the resurrection of the dead and the hope that it has for Christianity. And he even alludes to this, right? He even alludes to this phrase. It's not exactly this, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. But he alludes to this strongly. I think it's, I don't even remember exactly how it is. I'll tell you in a second. But the point is that even Paul speaks against this, the pessimism that leads to this life of indulgence. An indulgent life is pessimistic. I mean, think about it. People, maybe you've met addicts, various forms of addictions who just indulge and indulge and indulge. That's a pessimistic way of living. That is a hopeless way of living. And that is rooted in this philosophy. And Paul is speaking against that in 1 Corinthians 15 by talking about we have real hope. He says this in verse 32. If the dead are not raised, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. He's basically saying if we have no hope for the resurrection, then the Epicureans are right. But since we know that we have hope in the resurrection, the Epicureans are way wrong. Now, the Epicurean, just a little sidebar that I always like to put in here, Epicurus was also a major player in the discussion of the problem of evil. And he codified this view called the Epicurean trilemma, which basically argues that if God is all-powerful and all-loving, then why does evil exist? And he concludes that because evil exists, God cannot be both all-powerful and all-loving. Now, that's also a kind of a smack in the face for monotheistic faiths like Christianity. And Paul also kind of speaks against that in the New Testament. So both of these views, Stoicism and Epicureanism, pop up in the writings of the apostles. Let's talk about Judaism in the 1st century. And Judaism is kind of structured around 4 primary parties. And you've heard of all of these, I'll bet you. And these parties are political. They're political parties more than they're religious. Even though religion played a part in their politics, these parties are actually primarily political. The first are the Pharisees. They're the ones that you probably heard the most about because Jesus speaks about Pharisees all the time. And they were the rabbi class, okay? Rabbis and priests are not the same thing, okay? They're not. Rabbis are teachers. Priests in the 1st century worked in the temple area. So the Pharisees are the rabbi class, and they were the majority. There were more Pharisees than there were Sadducees, and that's because they were provincial. They were out in the provinces. They were out in the communities. They were out in the little burgs and the, out in the burgs, out in the villages, rather than the hub of Judaism in Jerusalem. Now, here's one that may blow you away because of how much preaching we've heard. They were actually the liberals on the spectrum. They would be the Democrats of the Jewish world. Even though we sometimes think of them as highly conservative, they weren't. They were actually very liberal. in the interpretation of the law. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you've read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and Deuteronomy, you realize that they do not answer every possible question, right? Is that accurate? Anybody disagree with that?
All right.
So when it says things like, keep the Sabbath holy, don't work on the Sabbath, you could ask, what's the next question? Well, what qualifies as work? Well, what they did was, what the Pharisees kind of did was, they tried to answer all those questions, and they did it over a long period of time. It wasn't like three or four kind of sat down and just worked it all out. It happened over a long period of time. But they actually tried to answer those questions. They said, well, this is what the Bible, this is what the Old Testament says. This is what the law says. But this is how we apply it. This is how we interpret it. This is how we live that out. And they created a ton of books, a ton of commentary on the law. You might have heard of it. It's called the Talmud. Anybody ever heard of the Talmud, or the Talmudic tradition, or something like that? They that is basically the long Pharisaic collection of interpretations of the law. So these guys are actually the liberals. They're the ones who try to interpret it and stretch it as far as it can go.
Sadducees are the scribes.
What's that? What's that? Oh, I thought somebody said something. Sorry.
No, I just spoke out of turn.
Oh, no, you didn't. You're fine. You're fine.
I was just going to say.
What's the name of the book that you just said?
I'm sorry? What's that, Ava?
Can you repeat the name of the Tom?
Oh, the Talmud?
That's the name of the book.
Yeah, it's not one book. It's a whole bunch of books. Yeah.
Oh.
Talmud, Talmud. The Pharisees did resist Rome, right? They did not appreciate Roman occupation, though they were not radicals about it. They did not revolt. It was more like passive resistance. And then what happened in 70 AD, we mentioned this earlier, the temple was destroyed and Jerusalem was actually destroyed. Well, when that happened, the other branches kind of just disappeared because they were all tied to the temple in some way or the other. And so post-temple Judaism, meaning Judaism that began about 70 AD to the present after the fall of Jerusalem, is predominantly Pharisaic. Contemporary Judaism in all of its forms is predominantly Pharisaic. And Pharisaic Judaism was founded by some pretty influential leaders, Hillel the Elder and his disciples Gamaliel and Shammai. Anybody know who Gamaliel's most famous disciple is? Paul, that's right. Yeah, Paul studied under Gamaliel the first, and very significant Pharisaic leader, very significant. Any questions on the Pharisees? Okay, great. Let's talk about the Sadducees. Okay, so the Pharisees were the rabbinical class, the rabbis. The Sadducees were the priestly class. They were the priests. And because of that, they were centered in Jerusalem. Now, they were the minority, but they were the social elite, okay? They were not just the social, they were the religious elite also. The majority of the Sanhedrin, which was the Jewish ruling council, was made up of Sadducees. Now, what's interesting about them is that they were actually the conservatives in the interpretation of the law. And if the law didn't say it, they didn't believe it. They were very literal, very specific in their interpretation. And they thought all of the question answering that the Pharisees was doing was a violation of God's word. Anybody know one issue in particular that caused big fights between the Pharisees and Sadducees?
The resurrection.
That's it. Yeah, resurrection. Paul even in Acts found himself in a hearing backed into a corner, and he started playing everybody against themselves by start talking about the resurrection, right? Yeah, they did, man. That's exactly what happened. And and the Sadducees were very much against resurrection. So when they heard Jesus, when they started hearing about Jesus' resurrection, they thought that was total nonsense. Total nonsense. The resurrection doesn't exist because it's not mentioned in the law. And that is true, ladies and gentlemen. Resurrection is not mentioned in the law of Moses. Now, they were the conservatives, but they were also collaborators, which made them very unpopular with a lot of Jews. They collaborated with Rome, which is one of the reasons that they were able to maintain their power, right? But Sadducees ended quickly. The Sadduceic class ended in 70 AD. When the temple was destroyed, Jerusalem fell and the temple was destroyed, Sadduceic Judaism ended, like immediately, because they were tied entirely to the temple rituals. Some significant Sadducees, all high priests of the era, and there are two of them named in the New Testament, Caiaphas and Annas. Both of them were Sadducees. Yeah.
So in our book, it said that even the Sadducees resisted Rome. Sadducees and Rome were collaborated.
Yeah, they were. That was kind of. I'm interested. I'll look into that. Shelley made that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would disagree with him. And I have multiple books on my in my library that would disagree with them too. They were Sadducees. They were collaborating. Now, they didn't like Romans. It wasn't like they liked them. They collaborated with them. They kept their power because of them. And one way that they did that was through the Herodian dynasty, right? The Herods were not ethnically Jewish. They were Greeks. But when Rome appointed them rulers of Palestine, they converted to Judaism. Now religiously, they were Jews. And they sided with the Sadduceic class because so one of the ways that they worked with Rome was through the Herodians. So, yeah. All right, let's talk about the Zealots. These guys are a lot of fun. They were the politically radical. They were religiously Pharisaic, or they tended to be Pharisaic, but they were the politically radical. And their entire goal was to see the Romans withdraw their occupation from Palestine. Now, the majority were not violent, but some of them were very violent. In fact, the Sicarii was a sect of zealots that were violent. And some scholars have argued that Judas Iscariot was actually a member of the Sicarii, and that's where his name Iscariot came from. That he was a member of the Sicarii class, the Sicarii subsect of the Zealots. Now, not all of them were violent, but they were all activists. The Zealots were the ones who protested. They were the ones who petitioned. They were the ones who made a stink about everything, especially about the Romans. But then disaster happened in the 60s. In the late 60s, the Zealots came to power in Jewish government. They had worked themselves to leadership of the Jewish people. They took a large percentage of the Sanhedrin. Their campaigning out in the burgs and the provinces had won them public support. And so when they gained power, what they decided to do was that the right thing to do was to revolt against Rome. And so that's actually what started the Jewish war that ended with the destruction of Jerusalem and the fall of Masada. So sometimes, like the guys who, sometimes the best thing is not to give the activist power. And this is a classic example of that. The final group doesn't actually appear in the Bible. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Zealots all appear in the Bible. The final group doesn't actually appear, although we've been influenced by them. They're called the Essenes, and they were ascetic, meaning they were kind of, they lived lives of withdrawal, of sacrifice. They established some early monastic communities, and the most famous of those is Qumran. Anybody ever to Qumran? Yeah. Philip has. Anybody up there? Qumran, have you heard of it?
I have.
Yeah.
Heard them.
Well, you definitely heard of them when we get to it here in a second. They were religiously conservative, and what was interesting about them was they valued the written word, and they collected large libraries. Well, in 1949, a shepherd boy was looking through some caves near the Dead Sea and found a bunch of old jars. And when he opened up those jars, he found all these scrolls that we now call the Dead Sea Scrolls. And what we found out was these scrolls were part of the library of the Qumran community. So the Essenes have actually influenced our contemporary translation of the Bible because they're the ones who compiled what we now call the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I consider it a privilege. A few years back, I got to, the Dead Sea Scrolls were on tour in the United States, and I went and saw them in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I saw the oldest list of the Ten Commandments in existence. And so I sat there and just kind of marveled at this list of the Ten Commandments. What's amazing, it was only this big. The whole list was. And I don't know how small of a pen they wrote it with, but some Essenic. What's that? Are you cutting out? Yeah, hang on. Ava, do you have me now?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have any problems?
Yeah, at the same time, you just kind of went out a little bit. Talking about the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, sorry about that, everybody. We're sitting in the church building, and right now we have our Hispanic congregation, Camino de Fe, is holding services, and they're all logged into the network, and so just from time to time it's bogged down just a second. So apologize for that.
No problem.
Okay, what I was saying is I got to see the oldest existing list of the Ten Commandments that we have, and the list is only about this big, and I had to look at it through a magnifying glass. But it was really cool. The oldest list in Hebrew in particular. So anyway, that's kind of the Essenes, and they do appear where they don't appear in the Bible. They do have influence on Christianity, especially the call to value the written word. Some have argued that John the Baptist was an Essene. He could have been. Some have argued that he was actually the leaders of Qumran of Essene communities were called the teacher, and some have argued that he was even a leader of Essenic communities. Some have argued that. Others have argued that he was a Nazarite. We actually don't know much about John the Baptist. Let's talk about the relationship. Are any questions on Pharisees, Sadducees, Zealots, or Essenes? Here in a minute, we're going to have to do some discussion because I need you all to talk and not me for a minute. Let's talk about the relationship, right, between Jews and Gentiles. Jews considered Gentiles ceremonially unclean in the first century. And okay, goodness, that's a text from about 10 o'clock this morning. They were considered Gentiles generally or ceremonially unclean, and were in general pretty hostile towards Gentiles. They didn't go in Gentile homes, and some of that stuff pops up frequently, especially in the Gospels. But believe it or not, we actually have some categories of Jewish Gentiles, and what this meant was it was based on the Gentiles' relationship with Jewish teaching. The first level were the God-fearers, and these were Gentiles who recognized the Jewish God and would observe certain features of Jewish teaching, right? They might recognize the holidays, they might listen to Jewish preachers, but these are the God-fearers. These are the ones who believe in the Jewish God, although they haven't made much of a commitment towards the Jewish God. The second group were the proselytes, and these were Gentiles who actively observed the teaching and lifestyle, but did not undergo the rite of circumcision, right? These are Gentiles who basically live as Jews, observe the law, but have not gone the full distance and submitted to circumcision. And then the third group are the converts, right? These are Gentiles these were full converts. These are Gentiles who underwent circumcision and became fully functional religious, not necessarily ethnic Jews. Now, what's interesting, all of these came with like levels of proximity. Proselytes and converts could go into the court of Gentiles at the temple, and then the converts could actually enter the temple area. They were Jews. They were considered ceremonially clean. They could enter the temple. Same way in the local synagogues. Converts could join synagogues. Proselytes could stand behind the veil and listen to the conversation the conversations in synagogues. And then the God-fearers usually had Jewish friends who would kind of teach them stuff. That was all about the proximity. One of the things about this is about proximity to Jewish worship. So why does this matter, though? Let's talk about that. Let's go. Ooh, what did I do? Why are these categories of Jewish Gentiles important? Why do they matter? What do you guys think?
Well, there's a lot of discussion on behalf of Paul and the other apostles about how new Christians should be treated and whether they had to be circumcised or not. And he uses some of that as the examples
of
how it should be.
Yeah. Yeah. What else?
Well, I think it's important because the gospel was being spread to the Gentiles. And so how were they supposed to behave as I guess they wanted them to be Jewish Christians, still observe some of their laws.
Yeah.
After they were converted.
Yeah, questions about discipleship. How are Gentile converts supposed to be discipled? How are they supposed to follow up? Sure. Those are questions that were certainly asked, I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah. What else?
But we also see because of this that the gospel spread much faster because there were Gentiles who had been exposed to the word. Even though it was the Old Testament, but we see that Mark and Matthew use a lot of the Old Testament as far as foretelling what was coming in the New Testament. And of course, Luke really preaches writes to the Gentiles.
What do you want? See John popping in there.
Kind of opens up Jesus and God to the rest of the world. It takes it out of just Judaism and out of Jerusalem, and it opens it up to the rest of the world.
Yep. Okay. Yes. Listen, the thing that we're going to find here in a minute, we're going to talk about this specifically here in a second, is that these relationships, these categories, the God-fearers, the proselytes, the converts, they actually matter in some of the interpretation of the early scriptures, especially some issues in the book of Acts. So what else is going on? What are the thoughts?
It's been at least 500 years thinking that Jesus or the Messiah would actually free them from the Gentiles.
Okay, yeah. That was certainly the belief of some of the what we call Judaizers. Was, if you didn't catch what Philip said that they'd spent about 500 years believing that when Messiah come, he was going to deliver them from the Gentiles. And yeah, that's a good observation. And so that was one of the arguments about the Judaizers, was that Jesus came to liberate Israel and Israel alone. So let's talk about a couple of events, right? Let's talk about two key biblical historical events from the apostolic era. The first is Pentecost, right? And this is just as we start talking about Pentecost, let's be very clear. Our conversation is not necessarily about debating the theology of Pentecost, but to understand its historical significance. And in Acts chapter 2, we have this narrative of Pentecost. And what we see in that is we see the establishment of the post-resurrection church. And with that, we begin to see for the first time some organization. One thing to always remember, when movements begin, there's kind of this romantic notion that they should stay grassroots, very fluid, very, very easygoing. The problem with that is grassroots movements don't last. In order for a movement to last, it has to organize. But the moment it organizes, it ceases to be grassroots. And that's actually what we start to see in the establishment of the post-resurrection church. We start to see some organization begin. We see the authority of the apostles. In Acts chapter 6, we read about the appointment of the deacons. Remember, there was a debate about who should be taking care of the Hellenistic widows, actually, and the solution was, we're going to appoint some leaders, some Greek leaders, to take care of our Greek Jewish women, and that's where the deacons come from. All right, big fancy word coming here in a second. We see the early proclamation of the kerygma. Has anybody in their life ever heard of kerygma? Tim, I think you're muted, brother. No, kerygma is a big fancy word that means apostolic proclamation, right? The kerygma is the message of the early apostles. And it comes from the Greek word kerusso, which means to preach. That's where it comes from. And so, what's that?
I didn't catch what you just said.
Did you lose me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Were we talking kerygma?
Yes.
Okay. Kerygma is, the word refers to the early message of the apostles, the early apostolic message. And we actually see it laid out. Peter preaches the kerygma in Acts chapter 2. Kerygma comes from the Greek word kerusso, which means to preach, right? But it's basically this. The kerygma is basically this. We saw Jesus alive, and it changed our lives forever. I mean, summed up, that's basically what it is. And if you go back and examine Acts chapter 2, Peter's sermon, and yes, he quotes Joel, and yes, he quotes the Psalms, but the essence of his message is, Jesus is alive, we saw him, and it has changed our lives, and now we call you to repent and be baptized. That's the essence of the apostolic proclamation in the first century. But we do start to see that being formalized in the Pentecost story. We also see in the beginning of the Christian society, right? The formalization, the forming of a Christian community. All of these things we observe in the Acts 2 Pentecostal narrative. Also kicking off at Pentecost, we see the expansion of the church begin, right? Here's how this worked. Pentecost was a Jewish festival, right? Everybody know that, right? Pentecost was a Jewish festival. And what happened was there were pilgrims from all over the Mediterranean world in Jerusalem for the feast of Pentecost. And when Peter and the other apostles come out and proclaim the resurrection of Jesus to this crowd, many of those people who were listening to Peter, they believed and were baptized, and then they went home. And when they went home, they took this message that they heard in Jerusalem of the risen Jesus with them, and it started establishing Christian communities all over the place. And we see this probably clearest, we think, this is what the scholarly theory is, we see this clearest in the in the book of Romans. The book of Romans is a letter of introduction. Paul is introducing himself to the Roman church, a church that apparently has been in existence for a long time. And the belief is that there were Roman Jews who came to Jerusalem for that Pentecost, heard Peter and the other apostles, believed, went back home to Rome, and established a Christian church there. And that's part of the theory, right? That's part of the theory. And then we also see the earliest apostolic witness to the Gentiles in Acts chapter 2. Man. We're going to break here in about 5-10 minutes. So hang tight. We're almost done. Forgive me for pushing everybody so hard. The second one is the second key biblical historical event is the Council of Jerusalem in Acts chapter 15. And this council centered on the Jewish debate of the early church, right? Remember, and the question that they attempted to answer in this meeting in Acts 15, this meeting of church leaders, was, are Gentiles saved without first becoming Jewish converts? A particular group that we now call Judaizers, they argued that Gentiles could not be saved unless they first converted. This is where that language comes. This language matters. Unless they converted to Judaism first. Peter and Paul, on the other hand, argued that Gentiles are saved and cited the presence of the Holy Spirit in Gentile lives as evidence. Now, it kind of hit a gridlock. And so James, the brother of Jesus, offered a compromise. And the compromise was this, that Gentiles must first become Jewish proselytes, meaning that they observe kind of the rules of Judaism, even though they don't undergo the rite of circumcision. Turns out neither side was actually happy about the compromise, and it created a great deal of fallout. And the fallout actually resulted in the writing of the book of Galatians. The Judaizers who were against Paul and Paul's ministry of the Gentiles started visiting the Galatian churches on a smear campaign against Paul. And they basically argue, we don't exactly know what they told the Galatian Christians, but it comes down to just a handful of possibilities. They either said that Paul was mistaken, that they were mistaken and they misheard Paul, or Paul was basically this big jerk and we all hate him and you guys ought to get rid of him. Well, when Paul found out about it, he was livid. And he wrote livid, angry. Galatians, yes. Galatians is, I love it. It's one of my favorite books in the New Testament. But Paul's language is pretty rough at times. And basically, Paul writes the book of Galatians to speak on his own behalf, but also to speak out against the Judaizers' notion that Gentiles must first convert to Judaism, because he believed that we are saved not by observing the law, but by grace and faith. And by the way, that is the view that has prevailed throughout history. But early on, that was a major controversy in the early church. So, man, all right, questions.
I don't have a question, but I wondered if you would send us the slides.
Are you not seeing them?
Oh, we're seeing them, yeah. But we're trying to write.
What's that?
We just can't keep. What was that? We were writing down information. We just couldn't keep up. That's all.
I'm going to send you the slides afterwards. Yes.
Okay.
So I'm going to send them to you anyway. Yeah. You don't have to write all this down. Okay. No, you do not have to write this down. I will provide all the slides to you. Okay?
Thank you.
You bet. So relax, listen, and engage the conversation. You don't need to take a bunch of notes. You're going to get all this. All right?
Okay.
Okay.
So was Galatians Paul's first letter?
Yeah, the first one that we have. We don't know if it's his first letter specifically, but it was the first letter that we have. It's his oldest. Okay, are you losing me, everybody? Hello? Okay, did we lose everybody?